So Franklin Curie and I decided that we were going to read some slightly more challenging books. And I decided that I was going to read one of my all-time favorite stories, and that's called Dealing with Dragons. It's written by a lady named Patricia C. Wrede, and this is the first book in a series called The Enchanted Forest. I really like these books because they take all the fairy tales and things that you think should be right, and they just kind of turn them on their head. And we get a princess who's very different from the others, and I like different. So we're going to go ahead and start this book, and I obviously am not going to read it all at once, but I'll read you a little bit here and there, and hopefully over the next few weeks we will have a chance to finish this book together. Okay. Chapter 1, in which Cimarron refuses to be proper and has a conversation with a frog. Linderwall was a large kingdom just east of the Mountains of Mourning, where philosophers were highly respected and the number 5 was fashionable. The climate was unremarkable. The knights kept their armor brightly polished, mainly for show. It had been centuries since a dragon had come east. There were the usual periodic problems with royal children and uninvited fairy godmothers, but they were always the sort of thing that could be cleared up by finding the proper prince or princess to marry the unfortunate child a few years later. All in all, Linderwall was a very prosperous and pleasant place. Cimarron hated it. Cimarron was the youngest daughter of the king of Linderwall, and her parents found her rather trying. Their first 6 daughters were perfectly normal princesses with long golden hair and sweet dispositions, each more beautiful than the last. Cimarron was lovely enough, but her hair was jet black, and she wore it in braids instead of curled and pinned like her sisters. And she wouldn't stop growing. Her parents were quite sure that no prince would want to marry a girl who could look him in the eyes instead of gazing up at him becomingly through her lashes. As for the girl's disposition, well, when people were being polite, they said she was strong-minded. When they were angry or annoyed with her, they said she was as stubborn as a pig. The king and queen did the best they could. They hired the most superior tutors and governess to teach Cimarron all the things a princess ought to know: dancing, embroidery, drawing, and etiquette. There was a great deal of etiquette, from the proper way to curtsy before a visiting prince to how loudly it was permissible to scream when carried off by a giant. Linderwall still had an occasional problem with giants. Cimarron found it all very dull, but she pressed her lips together and learned it anyway. When she couldn't stand it any longer, she would go down to the castle armory and bully the arms master into giving her a fencing lesson. As she got older, she found her regular lessons more and more boring. Consequently, the fencing lessons became more and more frequent. When she was 12, her father found out. "Fencing is not proper behavior for a princess," he told her in that gentle but firm tone recommended by the court philosopher. Cimarron tilted her head to one side. "Why not?" It's simply not done." Cimarron considered. "Aren't I a princess?" "Yes, of course you are, my dear," said her father with relief. He had been bracing himself for a storm of tears, which is the way his other daughters reacted to reprimands. "Well, I fence," Cimarron said with the air of one delivering an unshakable argument. "So it is too done by a princess." "That doesn't make it proper, dear," put in her mother gently. "Why not?" "It simply doesn't," the queen said firmly, and that was the end of Cimarron's fencing lessons. When she was 14, her father discovered that she was making the court magician teach her magic. "How long has this been going on?" he asked wearily when she arrived in response to his summons. "Since you stopped my fencing lessons," Cimarron said. "I suppose you're going to tell me it isn't proper behavior for a princess." Well, yes. I mean, it isn't proper. Nothing interesting seems to be proper, Simran said. You might find things more interesting if you applied yourself a little more, dear. Simran's mother said. I doubt it, Simran muttered, but she knew better than to argue when her mother used that tone of voice. And that was the end of the magic lessons. The same thing happened over the Latin lessons from the court philosopher, the cooking lessons from the castle chef, the economics lessons from the court treasurer, and the juggling lessons from the court minstrel. Simran began to grow rather tired of the whole business. When she was 16, Simran summoned her fairy godmother. Simran, my dear, this sort of thing really isn't done, the fairy said, fanning away the scented blue smoke that had accompanied her presence. People keep telling me that, Simran said. You should pay attention to them then, her godmother said irritably. I'm not used to being hauled away from my tea without warning, and you aren't supposed to call me unless it's a matter of utmost importance to your life and future happiness. It is of utmost importance to my life and future happiness, Simran said. Oh, very well. You're a bit young to have fallen in love already. Still, you always have been a precocious child. Tell me all about it. Simran sighed. It isn't to him. Enchanted, is he? The fairy said with a spark of interest. A frog, perhaps? That used to be quite popular, but it seems to have gone out of fashion lately. Nowadays, all the princes are talking birds or dogs or hedgehogs. No, I'm not in love with anyone. Then what exactly is your problem? The fairy said in exasperation. This. Simran gestured at the castle around her, embroidery lessons and dancing, and being a princess. My dear Simran, the fairy said, shocked. It's your heritage. It's boring. Boring? The fairy didn't appear to believe what she was hearing. Boring. I want to do things, not sit around all day and listen to the court minstrel make up songs about how brave Daddy is and how lovely his wife and daughter are. Nonsense, my dear. This is just a stage you're going through. You'll outgrow it soon, and you'll be very glad you didn't do anything rash. Simran looked at her godmother suspiciously. You've been talking to my parents, haven't you? Well, they do try to keep me up to date on what my godchildren are doing. I thought so, said Simran, and bade her fairy godmother a polite goodbye.